Elvis Presley's life as it has never been told on television by intimates who have never spoken about the Elvis nobody knew. The innocence, the guilt, the rivalry with the Beatles, the women he couldn't love, the world he couldn't face. A life reconstructed on film with carefully selected performers who represented the three stages of Elvis's life. A searing portrait of an image so indelible that even now it provokes controversy over a postage stamp. The boy, his mother loved him too much. The king, he became a star like the world has never known. The man, millions adored him, yet in his last moments, he died alone.
Three different sources I heard I was strung out on heroin. I've never been strung out in my life.
The true story. This is Hard Copy for Thursday, August 13, 1992. Good evening and welcome. I'm Gordon Elliott. From a poor backyard in the Deep South to the backlot here at the giant Paramount Studios in Hollywood, he left behind the sounds of greatness. There's never been one to touch so deeply with song, the greatest entertainer of his time, or to touch so deeply in death. I, Elvis, is the most intimate, truthful portrait of the inner man that television has ever presented. It's the story of fame and fortune, of generosity and self-indulgence, of hope and despair, of the birth of an era and the death of an innocence. By the time he reached the age of 42, he was the most famous man on earth. Any night he had his pick of the most beautiful women. Entertainers, politicians, and royalty all wanted to shake his hand, to touch him. With 140 gold records and millions of dollars, he could buy anything. The world was his, and yet somehow it wasn't enough.
I'm gonna go read a while.
Fall asleep.
On an August morning in 1977, an overweight, drugged Elvis stepped into his bathroom and suffered a seizure. His fiancée was asleep in his bed. The staff of his palatial estate were seconds away, but he was alone. Nobody heard, nobody came. As the great man's breathing failed and he started to hemorrhage, Elvis Presley had to realize that he was dying, a victim of his own excesses.
The autopsy report shows that he lived for a short time because there were broken blood vessels, a little hemorrhaging, and that he lay there on the floor long enough for these hemorrhages to occur before he finally died. It could have been 5 minutes, it could have been 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes at the outside.
If it is true that in such moments you recall all your days on earth, then his life flashed before his eyes. And in the case of Elvis, oh, what a life it was.
Elvis, let's listen to some real music.
You got the control, Scotty.
Elvis, that's us!
Elvis Aaron Presley started life dirt poor. So poor, his father Vernon was once thrown into jail for forging a check to buy food. His family always seemed to live in projects. But Elvis had been given two great gifts. Looks that could drive women into a frenzy and a voice to make the angels weep. And when he combined those gifts with black rhythm and blues, the result was sexual hysteria. There had never been anyone like him.
He was perfect. I mean, if you're going to build a rocket to shoot down a certain kind of airplane, he was there. God put him on this earth to get women in an uproar. You know, it was a perfect, they destroyed them all.
The reaction of little girls was very much like the same reaction of older girls. And that was orgiastic.
After 10 months of playing small clubs and fairs all over the South, Elvis is learning how to work a crowd the way few have ever mastered. The hundreds of dollars a week he's earning then must seem like a fortune. But within a year, Elvis will be a millionaire. And perhaps because he was such a loner growing up, Elvis is already gathering a tight-knit group around him that will become known as the Memphis Mafia.
When I first met Elvis, he was very shy, humble, very nice person, and tried very hard to make friends, because I think all during his early years he didn't have too many friends. So I think later on, like I say, when he became famous, he wanted to have friends around, and he spent money on them because he felt, that was going to keep them there. He's buying his friendship. Absolutely.
Early in his career, Elvis meets Colonel Tom Parker. He is neither a real colonel nor a real Southerner, but rather a Dutch illegal immigrant and a former carnival con man. But he does have a real genius for promotion. The legendary manager promises to make Elvis rich. Elvis's mother, Gladys, doesn't trust Parker, but Elvis signs with him anyway, and suddenly Elvis is the hottest singer in America and the most controversial.
Come back, baby, I want to play house with you. Hit it! Elvis was a genuine threat to the morals of white America. And the fact that he got thousands and thousands of little white girls quite excited really shook up the parents in the establishment. He was attacked from every level.
If you talk to the average teenager of today and you ask them what it is about rock and roll music that they like, and the first thing they'll say is the beat, the beat, the beat.
The establishment finds Elvis's new brand of music threatening, but they know a moneymaker when they see one. In early 1956, the ratings of Jackie Gleason's stage shows skyrocket when Elvis appears as a guest for the first time, live and uncensored, on national television. But Elvis seems surprised at the fuss people make over his gyrations. After all, he's only doing what comes naturally.
Even while he was on stage sometimes, you'd see the big smile come, and he'd shake his head sometimes because it amazed him that it elicited that kind of response.
This is Elvis at his best, his finest, his most alive. A far cry from the Elvis Presley who lay dying on his bathroom floor on August 16, 1977. As his life heads out of his body and passes before his eyes, surely he wonders how he got from that place so long ago and so far away to this one.
When he got into a drug problem, what he did at the end of his life, it wasn't Elvis, it was the drugs, and we all know, but everybody pictures Elvis as that person. They forget about all the great years and all the entertainment and the happiness he brought to people. But you're reading the stories and papers about him, was not what he was really like. I mean, he was this very naive, innocent kid that got wrapped up into a business that completely destroyed him.
Are you lonesome tonight?
I, Elvis, the story of the boy, the man, and the king, continues in a moment.
Are you sorry we drifted apart?
Presley was adored by women all over the world, but he never seemed to find that one woman that would fill the void in his life. Even Priscilla turned out not to be the soulmate that he desperately needed. There was really only one woman for Elvis Presley, and that was his mother, Gladys. And his devotion to her would shape the man he would become.
Here's one of the first songs I ever learned back at the Assembly of God Church. My mama taught it to me. It goes something like this.
On the last morning of his life, Elvis and a few friends gathered around a piano. Elvis is supposed to begin a nationwide tour the next day. But this will be the last time anyone will hear him raise his voice in song.
He got so worked up the day before a concert. He got so worked up before every show. I'm sure he had a lot of that on his mind. In fact, I know he did.
Thousands of people are waiting for Elvis to sing the next night in Portland, Maine. But for Elvis, heaven had already claimed the most important fan he will ever have, his mother Gladys.
When we've been there
10,000 years, bright shining as the sun.
Gladys was probably one of the sweetest women that ever lived. Very simple, from the soul. I mean, there was no other way to explain Gladys. She was just a mother who had an only child. The twin died. And so she became really sort of overly protective. There was no other term for it.
There will be many women in Elvis Presley's life, but none of them, not even the woman who will become his wife, Priscilla, will have the impact on Elvis that his mother Gladys had. Devoted and self-sacrificing, perhaps she loves Elvis even more fiercely than most mothers, because his identical twin brother, Jesse Garon, died at birth. Elvis would be her only son, and the son she lost.
Well, she sheltered his life. She made him a shy kid. In other words, she kept him away from just life. He was definitely, a mama's boy. I mean, I'll admit that in a minute. And I think the people that knew him will say the same thing.
Elvis may have slept in the same bed as Gladys until he was a teenager. Among poor folk in the deep south of that era, it wasn't uncommon. With only one bed in the house and mighty cold winters, families would often snuggle up and share. For Elvis, it wasn't sexual, but it did affect who he grew up to become.
He did not like to sleep alone. I think it was probably because of sleeping by his mother all those years. And that's why I think a lot of the reasons he liked to have a woman with him.
A kind of reckless, impulsive generosity will eventually become one of the trademarks of Elvis Presley. But one of the most important gifts is his first as a star. Elvis takes the entire bonus he receives for signing a record contract with RCA and buys Gladys a truly extravagant present.
He bought her the first car that she ever really had, and she really couldn't drive, was a pink 56 Cadillac, which is still at Graceland.
With Elvis's phenomenal success, he and his parents undergo a strange role reversal. He becomes the provider. In mid-1957, he buys a 26-room manor on 13 acres outside of Memphis. He has it decorated in purple and gold and white and has life-size metalwork figures of himself installed in the gates. He gives it to his mother. It is called Graceland.
Oh my word, that is just beautiful.
It was all, perhaps, a bit too much for them.
I think that Gladys and Vernon really were sort of, they were overtaken by everything. Gladys at any given time was not comfortable with Elvis's fame. She was very scared of him. She always thought that some fan was going to take his life or something would happen to him and she would lose him.
To the first Christmas in our new home.
Christmas, 1957.
For that one magic Christmas, the house, the money, the friends, the success, the stardom, taking care of mom and daddy, it was the culmination of all his dreams. And it probably was the happiest time of his life. It lasted for Christmas.
We had come back from doing Jailhouse Rock. We got back and we moved in. The house was just, it was like walking in a fairyland for him because it was, the mansion on the hill, so to speak, that you grew up, fantasizing about in all kind of country songs.
They have come an incredibly long way. Just imagine the impact of a Christmas like this on such a tight-knit family. A family that has known mostly hard times all its life. It wasn't that long ago that Elvis took a job after school to help out with the finances. His salary then, $12.50 a week. Now he can really play Santa Claus.
Thank you, darling.
Elvis was like all dressed up in a suit and tie and everything, and it was just like he went around on his motorcycle that Christmas and gave every employee he worked at Graceland like a $1,000 bill.
Oh, Elvis, thank you! Thank you!
Charlie, here's something.
In 1957, that was an awful lot of money.
Along with all the Christmas cards, Elvis receives greetings from the President of the United States. He is drafted into the U.S. Army. While in the Army, his life will change in ways he cannot possibly anticipate. He will lose the most important woman he will ever know. That woman was Elvis's mother, Gladys, and his grief over her death would be so fundamental it would sow the seeds of his own eventual destruction. Elvis is stationed in Germany when he receives the phone call that changes his life. Gladys is gravely ill. His touchstone, the center of his life, is dying. Elvis is allowed to race home to her side on emergency leave. It is 1958. His mother is in the hospital, and Elvis has left her bedside to get some rest at Graceland.
Billy, why don't you grab that?
Well? I got the phone, and it was his daddy, and he said, "Is Elvis?" And that's as far as he got. He started crying, and then the nurse took the phone. And she said, "You need to tell Mr. Presley that he needs to get up here as soon as he can, since his mother's taking a turn for the worst."
His mother has taken a turn for the worse.
Even as a teenager, I knew something, was seriously wrong. When we got to the hospital, his daddy was coming down the hall, and when he made the turn, naturally his daddy said, "Oh God, son, she's gone." And he kept saying all the way to the room, "Oh no, Daddy, no, she can't be." So he went in and he just kind of leaned across her and he was hugging her, and he said, patted her on her stomach, and he had a pet name for her called Satin, and he leaned across and he said, "Not now, Satin." And he said, "Why?" And he just kind of broke down and cried, and he said, "Oh God, not now, Mama." He said, I could give you everything." And he said, "Not now."
She's gone, son, now. Just leave her be.
For Elvis, Gladys Presley represents one of the most important things anyone can have. Someone who loves him and believes in him without conditions. Despite the adoration that will be lavished upon Elvis, the star, Elvis Presley the man, will never feel as loved again in his lifetime.
When they put her into the ground, he jumped on the casket. They were lowering the casket. He said, "Don't. I don't want you to leave. Don't leave me. Don't leave me." And it was really bad.
It was probably one of the most, well, I know it was, the most hurtful moments in his life.
Gladys was the best friend Elvis would ever have. His confidant, his conscience, the better angel of his nature. Without her, he is a ship without a rudder.
It was almost like, he had this real big burden on his shoulders now. He had to handle all the situations for himself with nobody really to turn to. Not taking anything away from his father, but I don't think he could really turn to his father and talk to him, or he didn't feel like he could, but he could his mother. They were so close and all. I think if she had lived, she would have had a big influence on him so much that he would have not been the same Elvis as he was after she passed away. She would say things and tell him things to do that, that he respected and he would do. I really think he might have gotten married quicker and possibly even had grandkids, because they talked about that a lot,
Now, Elvis is set on a long, lonely journey to Germany to finish his tour of duty. And one night, while PFC Presley must stay awake and alert on the German border, a sergeant introduces him to uppers. And a pill seems to solve all of Presley's problems. And the man who changed popular music, sexual mores, and even fashion will now become a pioneer in another endeavor, experimenting in drugs, a decade before it becomes fashionable. Also, while he's in Germany, Elvis meets a young woman who might be able to fill that terrible emptiness in the life of America's most eligible bachelor. She is beautiful. She will become his wife. She is 13.
Hi. Is Elvis here?
When she came to the house, she had like a little sailor outfit on, like a midi blouse, and she had her hair was in what I call ringlets. They were like this.
Elvis, somebody here to see you.
When I saw her, she just, she was a beautiful girl, and she still is.
Hey, Priscilla.
Hi.
But the startling fact of her age was scared us all to death.
Are you lonesome tonight?
Elvis is alone in the world. He will never feel as loved again in his lifetime. Not even Priscilla would fill the void left by Gladys. There will be only one other person in his life he will cherish as much. And tragically, he will lose her too.
Does your memory stray to a bright summer day?
boy, Elvis Presley, that the world has come to love as much as the music, the man, the king. Elvis the boy who will never recover from the loss of his mother Gladys, who will fail in a marriage to Priscilla, and who will not survive the relationship with his girlfriend Linda Thompson. Publicly, he has exploded on the music world of the 50s, revolutionized its style and become the heartthrob to millions of girls. Yet by 60s, as the biggest box office draw in Hollywood, the seeds of his destruction are already being sown. August 16, 1977. Elvis Presley will not survive the next 5 hours. He is just 42, but the king feels very old. He has many regrets.
WHBQ, and the #1 record for this final week of October 1962 is none other than The King.
2 years after Elvis Presley returns from the army, he arranges to bring a young woman he met in Germany back home to Graceland. She is beautiful. She will eventually become his wife. She is then 17. Her name is Priscilla.
He brought my letter. She wrote about it.
Believe it.
Priscilla Beaulieu is the daughter of an American Air Force captain. Elvis tells her family that she'll be carefully chaperoned at Graceland and even promises to make Priscilla his wife. After she moves in, the fans are told the young couple have a pure relationship, that Priscilla is saving herself for marriage. But it will be 5 long years before Elvis makes good on his promise. Elvis and Priscilla rarely spend any time together, partly because Elvis is busy living the life of a Hollywood matinee idol. Almost as soon as he explodes on the pop charts in the late 50s, he starts making movies. This is the screen test that launches his career.
Well, you can do anything but take me over my blue suede shoes.
He lip-syncs to his own recording of Blue Suede Shoes.
Slander my name all over the place. We'll do anything that you want to do. But honey, lay off them shoes and don't you step on my blue suede shoes.
In his early pictures, Elvis shows a real flair for acting. But now in the mid-60s, his talent is being wasted, squandered in a string of movies featuring dumb plots, lots of girls, car songs, and a few fights. The formula works, and Elvis is the biggest box office draw in the world. But he is miserable.
It just drove him bananas. He had no control. He had scripts that were horrible. But Elvis was a control person. If he didn't have control, he didn't like it.
But there are some advantages to being Elvis Presley. Every Saturday night, there's a party at Elvis Presley's Beverly Hills bachelor pad.
For the heck of it, one Saturday night, I just got this wild idea in my head, and I went around the house counting. And I counted the girls, and there were 7 guys in the room, 7 of us, not counting Elvis. There was 152 girls.
Elvis's parties in Beverly Hills were quite strange by Hollywood standards. There was no alcohol ever served, and when the ambitious models or starlets, all 10s and stunning, would come up to the house, they would be served potato chips, cookies, soft drinks, maybe iced tea, and there would be no drugs around, no marijuana, no cocaine, no LSD, and they would have a Sweet 16 party, basically.
The Memphis Mafia observe a strict protocol at Elvis's parties. None of the boys make a move on any woman till Elvis makes his selection. Then the man who can get up on stage and drive thousands of females into a frenzy focuses all his energy, all that sexuality, on one woman.
When he was on, he was on. I mean, it was coming from within, you know, and he was putting out such a feeling to this woman. And by the time an hour or two of doing this with her, she forgot she was with Elvis Presley. She's with this wonderful, gorgeous man.
Meanwhile, Priscilla is ever faithful, keeping the home fires burning in the vast, empty, and increasingly lonely rooms of Graceland. Elvis thinks that's just the way it ought to be.
Ironically, Elvis could also be very loyal when he wanted to be.
So there, in essence, was really 2 sides to Elvis Presley. The rock and rolling sexual buccaneer, which goes along with the position, and the Bible-raised, faithful husband or boyfriend. He was King Stud, and he was also a faithful partner.
As the quality of his movies goes downhill and Elvis grows more frustrated, he becomes increasingly dependent on prescription drugs, amphetamines to get him up for early calls and barbiturates to bring him down after a long day shooting. And he becomes obsessed with metaphysics, spiritualism, reincarnation. He reads every mystical book he can find.
The books that he read were very metaphysical. They were The Leaves of Moya's Garden. He quoted constantly from the Bible. He would sit and underline. We would just read for hours and hours upon hours.
In later years, Elvis will try his hand at faith healing. He will wander around a Memphis mortuary after dark and ponder the mysteries of the afterlife. But now, with the evangelical zeal of a Southern preacher, Elvis tries to enlighten and teach the multitude around him.
What does man gain by all the toil that he toils under the sun, Joe? I don't know, Elvis.
It was odd because a lot of times the multitude would be all of these gorgeous models or starlets that have come up to the house to perhaps sleep with Elvis or advance their career, and instead of a quick drink and let's hop off to bed, he's reading the Bible to them.
Amen. All these girls were gathered around this coffee table, and Elvis started off sitting talking. The more he got into it, the more animated he got.
The sun rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to the blaze.
And he had a cane, and he's raising that cane and telling them stories about with Moses and with the staff of the blood, the river, everything, the locust. But when it happened, it was all right with them. They had Elvis.
In the 1950s, Elvis Presley has been the rebel, the outsider who blasted in the age of rock and roll. But in the 1960s, while Elvis is busy making movies down in the valley in Hollywood, there is a second revolution, the British invasion, headed by 4 Liverpool lads who idolize Elvis. In 1965, the Beatles are in America, and a rock and roll summit is arranged behind these gates in Elvis Presley's Beverly Hills home. It's supposed to be a secret, but somehow word gets out. It's a night that changes history, and a night that is ominous to Elvis Presley as well. It is 1965, and the Beatles are absolute sensations. The biggest phenomenon since Elvis himself. They dominate pop culture the way Elvis did 8 years earlier. With a #1 single, a #1 album, and a #1 movie, all titled Help. Elvis's current movie, Tickle Me, is a flop. And it's been years since he made a real rock and roll record. Still, there's one person the Fab Four really want to see while they tour America. And in August of 1965, before playing the Hollywood Bowl, they call on Elvis at his gated Beverly Hills home.
John Lennon, Elvis Presley. Paul McCartney, Elvis Presley. George Harrison, Elvis Presley. And
all of a sudden, the Beatles are walking in the house. And it's like, you know, introducing royalty to royalty. One thing leads to another, and they come in, and the Beatles, being very, very shy people, were sitting there, and nobody said anything.
And they're just staring at him now. There's a moment of silence. As a matter of fact, it was a long moment of silence.
So finally, Elvis sits there, and he's nervous, and the Beatles are sitting there, and they don't know what to say.
Finally, he just looked at him, and he said, "Hey, look, if y'all are going to stare at me all night long, I'm going to bed."
I'm going to bed, man. Yeah, I was kind of hoping we could sit around and talk, maybe about music, maybe even jam.
Jam? And when he said that, they just went nuts. And, you know, because that was a dream for them. So then they got up and went by the piano, and they started singing. I mean, every one of us had said, boy, if we just had a tape recorder, that would have been fantastic.
On the surface, it appears to be a light-hearted jam session, but the Beatles are painfully aware of Elvis's decline as the king of rock and roll. John Lennon is the Beatle who finally breaks the ice on this touchy subject.
Mr. Lennon cornered Elvis in one part of the house and said, well, Elvis, how come you don't cut any more rock and roll records like you used to? And Elvis replied, well, it's my film schedule. It's kind of tight, but maybe I'll cut one soon just for kicks. Lennon replied, well, in that case, we'll buy that one. I'll bet it shook Elvis up a little bit. Lennon was just arrogant enough to sort of slap his face a little and say, Elvis, why aren't you making the records like you used to, the great records that made us want to be musicians? So come on, cut some rock and roll again.
A dream is born that night in the heart of Elvis Presley, a burning desire to get back to his rock and roll roots. It will take him 3 years to realize that dream. By then, there will be other complications in his life. In 1967, Elvis finds himself under pressure to marry Priscilla.
He said that he was more or less talked into it by the Colonel because he had made the promise to her father that if he would allow her to come and live at Graceland, that he would eventually marry her. Well, 5 and 6 years down the road, he pretty much had her, from what he said, and did not want to marry her.
Elvis is once again trapped in a role he doesn't want, an unhappy marriage. For many reasons, Elvis and Priscilla are people on different paths. He has his movie career, she has Graceland. But it isn't enough for either of them. By 1968, when Elvis's movie contracts expire, he knows it's time to rock out. And when NBC offers him a Christmas special, he jumps at the chance. It will be one of the most stunning comebacks in show business history. The show's director remembers that Elvis is terrified before the performance.
He said, my mind's blank and I don't want to go out there. And I sat there and said, Elvis, just trust me. Just go out there, and if you have nothing to say and you forget to sing the songs or anything, just come back and that'll be it. And that was the real turning point, because when he walked out there, it was electrifying, magical, and he started to ooze all that talent out.
After a decade of mediocre movies that would have ended anybody else's career, the King is back, in top form. Tragically, the best part of his life is already behind him. Elvis will be dead within 9 years. Tensions between Elvis and Priscilla mount. Priscilla argues with him about his escalating prescription drug dependence. According to her autobiography, to please him, she tries LSD with him. Instead of mind-expanding experiences, it widens the gulf between them. Eventually, Priscilla falls in love with her karate instructor. But in the end, it isn't drugs that kills the relationship. It's Elvis himself.
He seemed to have a sort of a aversion to a woman if she'd had a child or had been married. And unfortunately, once Priscilla had Lisa Marie, Elvis became totally turned off to having sex with her. It had something to do with his great love and reverence for Gladys, that Gladys, Mama, was on such a pedestal that he couldn't have sex with a mother.
1973. While Elvis prepares to go on stage in Vegas, Priscilla tells him what he surely must already know. The marriage is over. On October 11th, they begin their lives apart.
When he lost Priscilla, it was like he lost a trophy. He loved her, but she had the effrontery to screw around on him. It was all right for him to do it, but she had no right to do it. And I think that was a big, I think outside of he loved her, but I think this was such a blow to his ego.
If losing Priscilla is a blow to his ego, losing his 4-year-old daughter, Lisa Marie, is a blow to his heart.
Two people in Elvis's life who unconditionally loved him were his mother Gladys and his daughter Lisa Marie, and both were taken away from him.
Don't cry, Daddy. Daddy, please don't cry.
After the divorce from Priscilla and the loss of Lisa Marie, when they walked out of his life and his home for the last time, Elvis began a terrible downward spiral. Within 5 years, Elvis Presley will be dead.
Please don't cry.
For for his stardom and his success, and by the mid-1970s, that price was beginning to show dramatically in both his body and at times his personality. Elvis, who had ruled so triumphantly, was now a sad image of his former self. Elvis the boy, the man, the king, was now Elvis the lost. By 1977, people close to Elvis Presley are horrified by his appearance. A lifetime of drug dependency is slowly killing him. The once beautiful boy is now a frightening mirror image of his own mother, Gladys Presley, who died in her 40s. At 42, Elvis is dangerously close to following her tragic lead. Flashback to 1974. Elvis still has 3 years, still time to save himself. But the time is running out, and at the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas, rumors are spreading that Elvis is using heroin.
I hear rumors flying around, man. I got sick in the hospital, you know. From 3 different sources I heard I was strung out on heroin. I swear to God, and don't you get offended, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking to somebody else out there. If I ever find or hear of the individual that said the things they said about me, I will pull your goddamn tongue out by the roots.
Sad truth is, Elvis is fooling himself. Though he doesn't consider himself a junkie, he is drugged all the time. He can only keep up his grueling performance schedule by relying on doctors' prescribed pharmaceuticals. Ironically, he's also becoming addicted to a powerful painkiller called dilaudid synthetic heroin. Elvis is a paradox. He lives like a vampire, rising only at night. Although he owns a 26-room mansion, he spends most of his time in one bedroom and rarely goes out of that, preferring instead to watch visitors at the gates of Graceland through closed-circuit television. When he does come downstairs, he dresses in full Elvis Presley regalia. Perhaps to escape, Elvis begins touring.
You would see the hotel, you would see the limo, you would see the back of the stage, and I would see him on stage from the side, and that's where I would watch him from. We would go back into the limo and back into the hotel, and the process would repeat itself for the length of the tour.
On stage, he sometimes reads from metaphysical books. He doesn't finish songs. His adoring fans forgive him, and many of the people around him make excuses for him.
To me, it was Elvis' show, and who was I to judge or suggest that he could do a better job?
Still, and somehow miraculously, Elvis Presley keeps his bizarre sense of humor.
What's wrong with that TV set?
He gets a reputation for shooting out television sets and really earns the nickname he's had for years, Crazy.
Oh, man. You really thought I was going to do it.
Oh, no!
Bullet was going through the roof. It's one of those drop roofs, you know, because we're on the 30th floor. And then we had a rainstorm come into Vegas. And man, we're having buckets where they've got these leaks.
It is one of the great ironies of this story of ironies that after a decade yearning for a chance to really act, in 1974, Elvis Presley walks away from the best shot he'd ever get at serious acting.
It's about a washed-up rock star. Not that you're washed up. Don't get me wrong, really, Elvis. But what do you think?
That year, Barbra Streisand asks him to co-star with her in A Star Is Born. They meet in his Vegas dressing room. The deal falls through partly because Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, doesn't want Elvis to take second billing to anyone, publicly. Elvis shrugs it off, but privately, he's devastated at the time. Nobody realizes just what a blow it is. Until now, Elvis's drug use has been a carefully guarded secret. But during a concert date in Maryland, the secret nearly gets out.
I helped him out of that car, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. His hair was very unkempt, and he had a look about him. And he said, "Hey, Sonny." I said, "Hey, boss, come on, let's get you upstairs." "What'd you do, just wake up?" I said, "Yeah, they just woke me up when we landed." I got him upstairs, put him in his room, and then I led us in prayer, about 5 or 6 of us in the room, and prayed for him, and that the Lord would come down, because he wasn't doing it on his own.
For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever.
the shattering conclusion, step by step, minute by minute, what happened in the final 15 minutes of Elvis Presley's life in just a moment. As king of rock and roll, the final moments of his life, Elvis meets his maker. By 1977, Elvis is hurting all the time. Drugs have ruined his intestines, shut down his colon. He is bloated and is in constant pain, which in his mind makes the drugs all the more necessary. Despite all his problems, he presses on concert after concert, city after city. Elvis is working himself to death. Linda Thompson, a woman who lived with Elvis for 5 years, genuinely loved him and on several occasions saved his life. But she leaves him when he ODs. She realizes Elvis will never change. Other members of the old guard have moved on too. Those that remain are on a death watch.
It was awful straining on each individual.
But not all the people around the king have his best interest at heart.
Damn, the only thing that's important is he gets out on that stage tonight. Nothing else matters.
And within 6 months, Elvis Presley was dead.
From his bedroom, Elvis phones his doctor, George Nikopoulos, and tells him about the codeine pills. He can't take them. So Dr. Nick writes a new prescription for Dilaudid, a powerful drug Elvis has taken many times. Elvis's stepbrother delivers the drugs, but according to investigative author James Cole, Elvis gets his pills mixed up. He takes the codeine.
All of a sudden, and this is something that had happened before when he'd taken codeine, he began to feel itchy, and he began to get short of breath, and he began to feel clammy.
But this time, the codeine triggers a deadly allergic reaction. After years of living on the edge, after any number of overdoses, in the end, a tiny mistake kills the great man. Hours go by before anyone discovers Elvis.
So I ran upstairs, went into the bathroom, and Elvis was laying there face down in the carpet. As soon as I touched him, I knew it. His dad come upstairs, he fell down on his knees, tried to help me. You know, he kept saying, Elvis, wake up.
Elvis, wake up, boy.
Then there was a ride in the ambulance, and there was Dr. Nick coming in and saying he's gone.
Love me.
Who was Elvis Presley?
For me, he was the greatest entertainer that's ever lived, and the warmest human being that you could find.
Elvis has been dead for 15 years. I still have dreams about it. I hear him talking. You know, I see him in my dreams. It's as plain as day. It's such a phenomenal impression that was put on you that you never, ever get around it.
He was one hell of a friend to me, and he was a hell of a friend to my family. And I really miss him a lot.
Elvis Presley was the greatest rock and roller ever to gyrate his hips. He may have been the greatest American entertainer ever, but he was also a complex, intelligent, humorous, and tortured individual. The first pop superstar, a man tragically imprisoned by his own image.
I think Elvis was always searching for why he was put on this earth. Why was he picked out of all these people to be who he was? It was always a mystery to Elvis, and I just think he, looking down, say, hey, I was just human. I was a human being, nobody else. I was not a god, as people put him on this pedestal. He was not. He hurt just like anybody else did.
For the people who were close to Elvis Presley, the memory of Elvis at the end is a painful one. They naturally prefer to think of him in better times, and so that's the image we'll leave you with.
I wonder if you're lonesome tonight. You know, someone said that the world's a stage and each must play a part. Fate had me playing in love with you as my sweetheart. Is your heart filled with pain? Shall I come back again? Tell me, dear, are you lonesome?